What's going on, folks? This is Acid Root. So I'm going to review Linkin Park's Living Things album from 2012. Now, this is the last Linkin Park album that I have to review here. So I wanted to finish up the catalog and see the tour de force of the several years and over a decade of music that is Linkin Park. A lot of good stuff in here. There is at least one more project that they did do some work on, like the Mall soundtrack that I want to cover. But in terms of their studio albums, this about takes care of it. I did Recharged and One More Light recently, so I wanted to get this one taken care of. There is some good stuff in here, very much still in the same electronic type feel of like A Thousand Suns, and definitely in the electronic feel and EDM kind of feel of Recharge. Not quite as crazy as Recharge gets, but it does kind of have something in that light. And it's definitely a prime thing seeing Chester Bennington and Mike Shinoda kind of in peak form on this project. I mean, I just feel like their template that they had been doing since Hybrid Theory really kind of was just vintage at this point. It's really encouraging to kind of see that shine through and to see the stuff that they were doing. 'Cause for some reason, when Chester Bennington died, it feels like, because I don't know how many of his later songs, the band's later songs, get played past like Minutes to Midnight. It really feels like A Thousand Suns, Living Things, and The Hunting Party, and in some cases, One More Light don't get nearly as many spins as much as their early stuff when they were more new metal. But I definitely feel like they had a refined style later on, and it's definitely seen here, like Chester Bennington singing and just the overall effectual, this charismaticness of Burn It Down is just beyond beautifully made on this particular project. It just really has like some grace to it, just true refined grace to that type song. Makes you really miss Linkin Park and what they were on just 11 years ago now. So it's kind of the context behind it. But that's some of the atmospheres. Mike Shinoda is a skilled rapper, and he even sings a few times on this project. I don't know if this is the first one that he started singing on, but I do know he sang on One More Light. But it's just kind of, that's the context about it, is being able to see some of these more things and seeing that Linkin Park did last for quite a while, and they had quite the run as they did things and went about the art of what they did. There are some classic new metal type songs. It's electronic. There's no real rap rock on here, but they do like the Mike Shinoda verse and Chester Bennington hook, Mike Shinoda verse template with a few songs on here, and it's kind of like the vintage stuff from Meteora and Hybrid Theory and stuff. So it's pretty interesting to get that just more in an electronic sense. That's kind of the thing. There were 4 singles on this project. Really, there were only 3. There was kind of one that was kind of like a promo single or something like that, but I'll go ahead and talk about these. So the first single was Burn It Down, and this is what I was talking about here. This is like a really amazing song. It's pretty popular. It's basically the most popular song from this project on Spotify. I mean, it's just kind of an effortless song. It just kind of feels like a night venue kind of stepping out. Just a place you're going to hear when you go out in public. It's not real manic and heavy metal and that type of stuff. Just the production in the verses is really simple. I mean, it's almost to where you can barely hear it. It just kind of almost feels like it could be played at like a shopping mall or something like that. It's not just for dance clubs, although it can be at a club. I definitely feel like when you get to the chorus, it's a little bit more turned up and that type stuff. But I definitely would have to say, Mike Shinoda at the end of the song, he contributed, and they kind of did what they were doing on like the Meteora type vibes, where Mike Shinoda was kind of in the hooks more often. But Chester completely knocked this song out of the park. Just would have to say it's just great. It's like as good as like songs like Breaking the Habit and In the End and that type of stuff. Just amazing kind of song. And Lost in the Echo is more in the classic Linkin Park template. Mike Shinoda on the rap verses, and then Chester on the hook. And I would have to say this one's pretty solid too. This one's a little bit more electronic sounding. This is another kind of night venue kind of bop, kind of stepping out. A little bit more easy to hear and a little bit. I mean, I feel like Burn It Down is probably more the melodic song and more catchy, but Lost in the Echo just has more kind of like a groove kind of feel, where it's just more stylish for stepping out than Burn It Down was. But it's not to say it's a worse song. It's a great 1-2 punch here. This one just feels like more of a song that you'd have like a cherry cola with or something like that, just stepping out, doing that sort of thing, just going out and about in those type moments. And this great 1-2 punch, vintage Linkin Park here. Now, the other 2 singles I didn't enjoy as much, like Powerless was kind of like a kind of mid-tempo kind of ballad almost that just kind of felt like this the concept of I don't know it kind of is it's one of those typical melodramatic kind of Linkin Park songs, vintage them in that sense, but this was not quite as catching to me this time around. I mean, most of the time when they're kind of having their bloodletting and brooding and that type of stuff is usually more interesting with songs like Numb and Crawling and Breaking the Habit and What I've Done and some of that. But this one just didn't come off as good. I mean, normally when Chester does these sorts of songs, it's a lot better, but couldn't get into the catchiness. Maybe it was just the topic as far as that kind of went. But yeah, it's just normally it just doesn't have like that sort of ambience. I mean, I would almost say maybe this could be an almost song, but I just did not quite vibe with it enough to really get it to that point. But it is there. So, and then I didn't like Castle of Glass either. This one kind of felt like a Celtic kind of song. Yeah, this one kind of felt like a Celtic kind of song. I just didn't understand. It's kind of more folkish, folk rock. I didn't understand the context of why that kind of happened. It felt like a Linkin Park song designed for like Game of Thrones or something like that. Didn't really like the context behind it. It just felt like it was like from Ireland or Scotland or something like that. Not that that's a bad thing, but just to kind of say it was just kind of the most outlandish kind of song, especially for a single from Linkin Park. I don't understand where that one. It's I guess because it's called Castle of Glass, but I mean it kind of has like that castle vibe towards it somewhat. But I wasn't vibing too well with this one. That's the singles. I mean, normally I usually almost always like the singles by Linkin Park, which is kind of surprising that I just didn't quite get into them as much. Like the first two ones, Lost in the Echo and Burn It Down, are really great, but I feel like the album kind of got jet lagged. Now there are other good songs on here, but it's very spotty, and I guess I'll go ahead and talk about that. I'll go ahead and talk about the 6 songs out of 12 that I recommend. Really, there's only 11 songs because Tinfoil is an instrumental, so I'll go ahead and recommend the 6 songs to you. So they would be Burn It Down, Lost in the Echo, Tinfoil, the instrumental, I'll Be Gone, In My Remains, and Lies, Greed, Misery. So, yeah, Tinfoil felt like a soundtrack to like a movie or something, kind of that stuff that you would hear at like, it would kind of feel like something you'd hear in like a DVD menu where you're getting ready to push play on the movie and that type stuff. But it also just kind of feels like something where you're just chilling in your backyard, something like that, or just all in the living room, just laughing, having a good time, or just kind of smoking something like that, spaced out, having some food, that type of stuff. And it really has that grim kind of like ambient kind of feeling towards it. This really has like the kind of normally kind of moody-esque atmosphere, just with a little loud pitch in there that's kind of a little bit different for Linkin Park, but it still fits them, I would have to say. So that's kind of the concept. I did like the concept of getting an instrumental in there. I do like when folks do that sort of thing, especially when they hit the nail on the head with them. So, Lies, Greed, Misery has like a real nice electronic beat in there. This is a nice one. It's a pretty brief song, pretty quick and to the point, but it just carries over pretty well. Pretty fast hook on here, I'd have to say. I do remember hearing this song on the Recharged album, so it's kind of interesting some of the songs they chose. I think I like Victimize better on Recharge, but this is one that works pretty well. Lies, Greed, Misery has that nice kind of electronic kind of feel. It's probably up there with Lost in the Echo in terms of quality as to how good the instrumental kind of is. It's nice, more vintage Linkin Park. Like I'll Be Gone is kind of like an airy kind of dissonant kind of, this one's kind of an airy, dissonant, kind of outgoing beat, kind of similar to Burn It Down, similar to that one, and similar to like Tinfoil in some stages, I would have to say. But I did like the concept behind it. Just really, I mean, the songs that Chester chooses for his verses, where he kind of sings more and are not like the vintage Linkin Park with Mike Shinoda on the rap verses type thing. These type songs kind of are a lot more ambient and sprawling. They definitely have like a more where he just lets his verses and melodies kind of sink in, and they just sprawl out and kind of like are like a specter floating through your head or something. It's just kind of interesting how that kind of goes, but he does that really well. I mean, the singing on here is pretty top notch. It's state of the art to be able to say that. So you get that with In My Remains and Yeah, you get that with In My Remains, Burn It Down, and I'll Be Gone, and those are like some real nice ones to kind of have for that to happen. But I would have to say that that's pretty top notch as far as that kind of goes. But In My Remains kind of has like this kind of, it feels like an organ in the verses where you hear it, but it's just the instrument that it's kind of that is played in the verses a little bit higher pitched than that, so it's not an organ, but it definitely feels like something you'd hear in like an organ or something like that. But it's just kind of, it's interesting kind of get those ones. Just all of these really have like a kind of this glimmering creepy kind of feel towards them, but just understand that the production is not quite as like ambient as it was on like, or just quite as visceral as it was on Meteora and Hybrid Theory. It just feels like the production kind of took a backseat this time to like the melodies, which, you know, Chester Bennington singing, Mike Shinoda's rap verses, Mike Shinoda's singing, some of that stuff, and the hooks, you know, just the concept behind some of those. It just feels like you kind of get a glimpse of like the more entranced with the stuff that they do with like the melodies this time, and it's good to have that. But I do like, I don't know, it's just odd saying that Linkin Park doesn't have good beats, because almost every single time they normally do. Even on One More Light, their final album, they did have some pretty like glimmering and kind of spunky kind of production that just kind of felt like chilling. Or well, that album wasn't chilling, but this more kind of glimmering and just kind of like ambient, I guess you would say. But this project really, I feel like production is second to like I said, the melodies on here. But it's good, but it's just not outstanding. There's no real beat on this project that I feel like you just remember, like In the End or Breaking the Habit or What I've Done or something like that, or even Heavy from One More Light. It just doesn't quite have like the distinction. This is an album that just doesn't have a beat that really jumps off the page. But I would say that Burn It Down is probably the closest thing, but it's not because of the verses in the production. It's because of that. So it's really, I will say that Chester Bennington's singing jumps off the page this time. He really got a batch of melodies that just are completely like Iron Fist type stuff, and Mike Shinoda really kind of, Mike Shinoda had a new bag of tricks as well, and just the Linkin Park template works well. It's just they do a good job, but it's just not the same context that it normally would be for those sorts of productions. So me, you know, talking about some of the ones I didn't like, I feel like the second half of the album after the song I'll Be Gone, most of the rest of the album is pretty bunk between songs 6 and 12. Most of the rest of the project is pretty bunk minus Tinfoil. And I just feel like songs like, you know, Roads Untraveled, Castle Glass, you know, some of these Skin to Bone and Victimized kind of all have like a differential kind of approach, and they just don't have like, the arrangements for some of these are kind of like messier than they probably need to be, and they just don't have the same bite as like the front of the album. And I kind of feel like if they had kept the template of songs like Lost in the Echo and like Lies, Greed, Misery and some of that, I would have said that that would have worked better. Like Skin to Bone has a decent beat, but I just feel like the kind of airy, like I feel like Skin to Bone, I didn't quite like the synths in that song. I felt like that one probably could have been better. I liked what they were doing with In My Remains more, Burn It Down and Lies, Greed, Misery more. That one just kind of was not quite. I mean, I can see it being like a decent club bop, but it's not quite up to snuff with what they were doing. And Until It Breaks is kind of the same way. Powerless, I mean, the two ballad songs were kind of not as well good this time. I definitely felt like the ballad side of things probably could have been better. I just feel like I definitely would have to say that the energy that's carried into some of these ballad songs like Castle Glass and Powerless was not quite as catchy as it normally is. I mean, I don't know. It's kind of, yeah, I don't know. I kind of felt like the ballads just didn't work this time around. I feel like they had the more rave type songs going, but the energy did not quite carry over for me as well as like it normally does with some of these ballad type songs on here. And I definitely didn't like the folk kind of Celtic type vibe of Castle and Glass. And Victimize, I feel like was better on Recharge. I mean, that one was kind of a messy one. That was just kind of all over the place. Didn't have like a good arrangement of how that went. And Until It Breaks, I really didn't like the beat on Until It Breaks either. I mean, these are just I mean, for some reason, like I was saying, the production picks on this album were not quite as state of the art as they normally would be. I think they were just trying to do new things, but when they didn't go with like the standard Linkin Park template or have like some Chester Bennington singing in there that just kind of has like the sprawling kind of more night venue shopping mall kind of social outing type feel towards it, it kind of falters a bit. And I just feel like these are kind of strange songs to listen to just because the messiness and kind of dis- distorted kind of arrangements for how some of these went did not quite have the polish that the first half of the album definitely did. I mean, I see that the singles work, but it's just odd me not liking all the singles from a Linkin Park album. I kind of think that that's the thing. Like I said, I would almost want to give Powerless like an almost song, but I don't know the context as to how many times it would take to listen to it to be able to do that. So this is kind of the concept. But me liking 6 songs out of 12, I'm going to go ahead and give this album like a 5.75 out of 10. I feel like that's good enough to be able to say that it's middle of the road, is a little bit above middle of the road as far as like the approach to how it went. But I just kind of think that, I do think like if this album had had a better batch of beats and more emphasis on top of the melodies that they portrayed on this project, I definitely would have said that it probably would have been one of their best ones. Like, I don't remember The Hunting Party and I don't remember A Thousand Suns, but I do at least remember that A Thousand Suns was really electronic and kind of ethereal or almost like real futuristic sounding. And then Hunting Party took it back to like hybrid theory and that type stuff. That's just kind of the concept as far as that kind of went. I mean, this was like their sixth album, I think, or maybe fifth. Yeah, I think this was their fifth album. So that, I mean, it's good that they still had some good approaches on here, but it's just kind of Linkin Park continued their string of solid hit albums. So it's just kind of the fact that it's just a large complaint that just needs to be kind of reconciled with. And that's kind of the concept about it. It's just kind of, it's like that's just to me kind of a larger no for like a Linkin Park album than kind of what you might think. And that's just kind of the concept as far as doing that sort of thing. But they do have some good hits on here. Like I said, the vocals and the melodies and the lyrics are pretty well put together. It's just the fact that it just kind of takes precedence this time around. So that's kind of the concept. So 5.75. The social score, I'm going to give like a 6 just because, well, yeah, I'll give a 6 because the first half of the album has a lot of cuts just for like a more rave time, but it just kind of is like slight. I mean, that's kind of the concept behind it. It just doesn't have like the sheer packaging of like a normal Furious Linkin Park album like Recharged or even One More Light. Well, One More Light was pretty light on like hits, but I do feel like this one is kind of light too. I definitely would say Hybrid Theory, Meteora, and Minutes to Midnight are better than this project, but I don't remember about the other ones. But it's just kind of that's the whole concept. But I will say that Burn It Down and Lost in the Echo are some of Linkin Park's best songs just in general. Those are like career highlights. It's just too bad that more of this album didn't have that. And then on top of that, like the production on Burn It Down and Lost in the Echo were not better as well. But I definitely would have to say pretty like career highlight singles, at least 2 of them. But then on top, the negative to that is the fact that not all the singles are good. If they had been, I might have scored this album higher. In terms of the future, like I said, this is the last Linkin Park album that I have to review, and I just would have to say, I might at some point review the Mike Shinoda album from 2018. It's not going to be immediate, but across the course of the year, we might get to that. But for now, Linkin Park's catalog is done, and you can watch every single one of these. So I encourage that. This is solid. There is some great stuff in here to fuck with, but just understand the stuff that I said.